scholarship.
Okay, good. That's all right. So you got a scholarship to go into Columbia. You
Yeah.
get down to New York and you go to Columbia at the school.
Yeah.
Who's there now?
Well, I lasted at Columbia for about a month. And during that month was the first time I saw Miles Davis's quintet play live at Birdland on 52nd Street.
Fantastic.
And there was Miles. Well, I got there early, real early. I was maybe the first one in the club. And walked downstairs to the old Birdland.
Yeah.
And the first guy to walk out on stage was Paul Chambers. He walked out, held his bass, and just waited. Then Philly Joe Jones came out on the drums, and Wynton Kelly walked around. He had a hat on, a drink, and a cigarette, and he sat down at the piano. And then Train came out and stood there. And I remember just thinking for a long time, they're all standing there, like they were just kind of staring out into space, waiting for Miles. It was like a dramatic moment. Then Miles walks out, like in this really neat, short, tight suit with some sunglasses on, actually, and picked up his Harmon mute, put it in the horn, very relaxed. Didn't say anything to the audience. Put the Harmon mute, the horn up against the microphone, and he went boo doo boo beep. Ding ding, boo, and they played. They launched into their set, and I was changed forever.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful to have seen Miles live. You're in the audience, then you get the chance to play with him. What was that like to be able to play with him?
That night I just described was in 1959. It wasn't until 1968 that I got to play in his band.
Yeah,
and it was glorious because I had begun to follow Miles's career before I moved, because my dad had the 78 RPM of Miles on playing with Charlie Parker's band on Dial Records. Miles was 17 or 18
at the time, yeah,
playing with this beautiful sound. You could recognize his lyricism already, even though he was bebopping it, but he had his own thing going back then. So I followed Miles's recordings from his first solo recording in 1951 with Jackie McLean, Sonny Rollins.
Absolutely.
I followed all. I got every recording that Miles did, and studied them. Actually, the day I met him it was 1965 or so, and I was playing in Blue Mitchell's quintet. I got the gig. I got the gig replacing Horace Silver in his own quintet.
Oh, fantastic!
Because when Horace wasn't working with the quintet, Blue Mitchell would organize the guys like Junior Cook, Gene Taylor, and Roy Brooks, and they'd go out and do gigs and call themselves the Sister Sadie All-Stars, which was one of the titles of Horace's tune, Sister Sadie.
Sister Sadie.
Yeah. I'm not sure to this day how I was recommended for that gig, but I got that gig. So I traveled around and played and recorded with Blue Mitchell and that quintet. And when on one of the 6-week stints we did up at Minton's Playhouse in Harlem, Miles came in a couple of nights and sat in on trumpet. He took Blue's horn and played. And that was the first time I met Miles.
How fantastic.
But then I joined his band in '68, and it was a glorious 2.5 years.
But you really have, seems like you've done the preparation and the research by listening to the recordings and getting to know the stylistic sounds and phrasing of these artists, and the transcriptions that you did. That's a great way for a student to learn.
It is.
To take the time to transcribe. I mean, listening, of course, how powerful that is in itself. But when you're transcribing it, you now become a part of it. You take ownership of that music.
Yeah.
As a big
you
part
have to recognize all the details. That you recognize the note, and especially if you try to then play it back. Like what I used to do with Bud Powell's transcriptions when I could finally transcribe some of his stuff.
Yeah.
I remember when I lived in my first apartment in New York City, I had my stereo speakers behind me, and I'm sitting at the piano like this.
Yeah.
The turntable was behind me, and I put the track on that I had just transcribed, and I would put it at a volume that would be equal in my ear to the volume that was coming from my piano, so I could melt my piano sound into the recording, and then try to just really duplicate completely Bud's phrasing. Just
interesting.
Being able to duplicate something exactly is a skill that can be used to gain information. You don't have to, it doesn't mean that you're trying to be like that person. Well, you are. For that moment, you're trying to be like that person. But it's information that I would take to then help me with understanding myself and my own ideas, and
Beautiful.
then do it my way and so forth. It was a great training to be able to do that, transcribe as well as play along.
Boy, the fact that you're playing with the sound of the music behind you, you're already kind of mixing yourself inside
exactly.
the band. So you have to have the sensitivity to know not to play too loud and
You got to
not
be listening. It's like you're doing an overdub. It's like you're in a studio with the hands on, and you've got the mixer, and you've got the track is coming at you, and you're trying to play a unison with something there. You know, it was kind of like that.
This is
trying to mix it so that it gave me a feel of how, and I learned a lot doing that kind of. I'll tell you one thing I've been talking to my wife Gail about recently in terms of transcribing. It's something a lot of musicians miss. In that era of the 60s and 70s, I guess Bud Powell, Charlie Parker definitely got transcribed a lot. John Coltrane gets transcribed a lot, rightly so. These geniuses. But you know who doesn't get used? Whose solos don't get used so much as transcriptions is Miles.
interesting.
And I think it's a great study to transcribe Miles Davis solos, because especially the lyrical ones, the ones that have lots of space in them. There's lots of lessons to learn in there. It's just a little tip for you guys.
Why do you think Miles is not transcribed?
Because sometimes it's not flashy. It's too simple. He plays two notes. They go, I can do that.
But where he puts those two notes,
exactly.
and the feeling behind those two notes are the right two notes in this space. Exactly right.
Like the whole construction of the recording Kind of Blue is built on Miles's very, very simple constructions of songs.
I mean, just that studying Jimmy Cobb, you know, from that recording was magical for a drummer to be able to listen to it. And because of how Jimmy Cobb played, he led us to the path that you couldn't just focus on the drums. You had to hear the bigger picture of what everyone was doing, and that's really kind of what you've done. I mean, you really have taken this, the compassion that you have had to be able to play along to a recording and feel what the artist is playing, takes real deep concentration and real deep listening skills. And I mean, and that's, listen.